I lived out here. I was here for 5 years. I never dated here because I saw vicariously through my roommate how terrible it was.
Bro, so we're finding out that our favorite dancing happy widow, Erika Kirk.
What if the story everyone thought they understood is actually missing some of its biggest pieces? Right now, something unexpected is unfolding around Erika Kirk, and it's not slowing down. It's getting more intense by the minute. Just when people believed everything had settled, a name from the past has suddenly reappeared and changed the entire direction of the conversation. Cabot Phillips is now being talked about again, and this isn't just random attention. It's tied to moments, connections, and details that people are only now starting to piece together. What makes this even more interesting is that this isn't about a stranger stepping in. It's about someone who was allegedly close. Someone who may have been part of a chapter that was never fully explained to the public. As people dig deeper, old posts, photos, and interactions are being brought back into the spotlight. And for many watching, it doesn't look like something casual or insignificant. It looks like a connection that had depth. One that raises questions about timelines, about what was said before, and about what might not have been said at all. And this is where things start to feel different, because once timelines don't perfectly line up, people naturally begin to question everything else around them. It's no longer just about one detail, it becomes about the entire story and whether it was always presented completely or if parts of it were left out. But the real reason this situation is exploding right now goes beyond just resurfaced memories. The biggest factor driving attention is the growing belief that Cabot Phillips might actually speak out. And if someone who had real proximity to those events decides to share their version, people believe it could shift the narrative instantly. That possibility alone is enough to keep everyone watching closely. Because when someone from the past suddenly becomes relevant in the present, it usually means there are still unanswered questions. At the same time, reports suggest that Erika Kirk is reacting strongly to all of this attention, which only adds another layer to the situation. Because when reactions become visible, it often signals that something deeper is being felt behind the scenes. And that's why this doesn't feel like ordinary internet chatter. It feels like something building toward a moment where more could be revealed. Right now, people aren't just following the story for what's already out there. They're paying attention because of what might come next, and that anticipation is what's turning this into something much bigger than anyone expected. Now, as people started digging deeper, the timeline is where things began to feel even more confusing. And for many watching, this is the exact point where curiosity turned into real suspicion. Erika Kirk has publicly said in the past that she hadn't dated anyone for several years before meeting Charlie, presenting a version of her story that felt clean, simple, and easy to understand. But now, with old posts and interactions from 2017 resurfacing that appear to show her spending significant time with Cabot Phillips, people are starting to question how those timelines actually line up. Because if those moments are accurate, then it creates a gap between what was said publicly and what might have been happening privately. And that gap is exactly where speculation begins to grow. What makes this even more complicated is the nature of those resurfaced moments. These weren't just random likes or distant interactions. People are pointing to things like shared activities, birthday messages, and what they describe as personal exchanges that suggest something closer than just casual friendship. And while none of that automatically confirms anything, it adds enough context for viewers to start forming their own interpretations. Because when something looks consistent over time, people naturally begin to assume there was more to it, even if no one officially confirmed it at the time. At the same time, Cabot Phillips hasn't exactly faded into the background like many would expect someone from a past connection to do. Instead, he's remained visible, especially through his involvement with Turning Point USA events and public appearances tied to Charlie's legacy. And that's where the situation starts to feel even more unusual to people watching, because the idea of someone potentially connected to Erika's past now being closely associated with her late husband's public image raises questions that don't have simple answers. It creates a scenario where different parts of the story start overlapping in ways that feel unexpected, and that overlap is what keeps drawing more attention. Then there's the perception factor, which plays a huge role in how this is being interpreted online. When people see connections between individuals, timelines that don't perfectly align, and continued proximity in public spaces, they begin to build narratives that try to explain those patterns. And even if those narratives aren't fully proven, they gain traction because they offer a version of events that feels complete. That's why this situation isn't just being discussed. It's being analysed from every angle, with people trying to figure out whether what they're seeing is coincidence, misunderstanding, or something that was never fully explained in the first place. Right now, the timeline itself has become one of the biggest talking points, not because it provides clear answers, but because it raises more questions than it resolves. And when a story reaches that point, it usually means there's still a lot people feel they haven't fully understood. Which is exactly why attention on this situation keeps growing instead of fading away. As the timeline questions started gaining attention, the situation took an even more uncomfortable turn once people began looking at what happened after Charlie's passing, because that's where a lot of smaller details suddenly started feeling much bigger. At first, certain moments didn't stand out, things that could easily be explained or brushed off as personal choices or private decisions. But once everything else started being questioned, those same moments were pulled back into the spotlight and looked at differently. One detail people keep bringing up is the claim that on the night before Charlie passed, he and Erika weren't in the same room, something that initially had a simple explanation about rest and routine. But now, with all the other conversations happening, that detail is being reinterpreted by viewers who are trying to connect it to the larger narrative they believe is forming. At the same time, Cabot Phillips' continued presence in the public space is adding even more tension to the situation. Instead of disappearing quietly like many would expect from someone linked to a past chapter, he's remained visible, active, and in some ways even more connected to the environment surrounding Charlie's legacy. His involvement in events, especially those tied to How to Lead Like Charlie tours, has made people question why someone allegedly connected to Erika's past would now be associated with something so closely tied to her late husband. For many observers, it doesn't feel like a random coincidence, and that perception alone is enough to keep the conversation growing. Then there's the way the internet has started focusing on even the smallest details, turning them into major talking points. Things like old nicknames, shared moments, and even personal style choices are being analysed as if they hold deeper meaning. In some cases, completely unrelated elements are being pulled into the conversation and interpreted in ways that go far beyond their original context. This is where things start to spiral, because once speculation reaches that level, it becomes less about what's actually confirmed and more about how people are choosing to interpret what they see. And when interpretations vary widely, the story becomes more chaotic and harder to define. What's making this situation feel even heavier is the growing belief that something might still come out. The idea that Cabot Phillips could potentially speak on any of this has created a sense of anticipation that keeps people locked in. Because if someone with real proximity decides to share their perspective, it could either clarify everything or complicate it even further. And right now, that possibility is enough to keep the tension high, because people aren't just looking at what's already known. They're waiting for what might be revealed next. All of this combined has turned what could have remained a quiet, unclear situation into something that feels like it's building toward a moment. Every detail, every appearance, and every reaction is being watched more closely than before. And that level of attention is exactly what keeps pushing the story forward instead of letting it fade away. As the attention kept growing, the situation reached a point where it was no longer just about timelines or connections. It started turning into something much more intense, driven by rumors and online speculation that began spreading faster than anyone could control. Once people felt like there were unanswered questions, they didn't just stop at what was visible. They started digging into everything, pulling up old claims, resurfacing past discussions, and attaching new meanings to things that may not have originally had any deeper context. And this is where the narrative really began to spiral, because the conversation shifted from what can be seen to what could be hidden. Some of the claims being circulated started getting more serious, touching on topics that go far beyond simple relationship speculation. There were discussions about alleged past connections, questions about previous personal history, and even claims tied to organizations and activities that, if true, would completely change how everything is viewed. But the important thing to understand here is that many of these claims are not verified, and that distinction often gets lost once a story reaches this level of virality. Because when something is repeated enough times across different platforms, it starts to feel credible, even if there isn't solid evidence supporting it. At the same time, the internet has a way of amplifying the most extreme versions of any story. Moderate takes don't spread as fast. It's the bold, shocking, and emotionally charged claims that gain the most traction. And that's exactly what happened here. The more intense the theory, the more attention it received, and the more it got shared, discussed, and built upon. Before long, the conversation wasn't just about Erika Kirk or Cabot Phillips anymore. It became a mix of different narratives layered on top of each other, some based on real observations, and others based purely on speculation. This is also where perception starts to overpower reality. When people are exposed to multiple versions of a story at once, it becomes difficult to separate what's confirmed from what's assumed. Everything blends together, creating a version of events that feels complete, even if it's made up of both facts and interpretations. And once that happens, it becomes nearly impossible to slow the conversation down, because people aren't just reacting to information. They're reacting to what they believe that information represents. Meanwhile, Erika Kirk's responses to the situation have only added more attention. Any reaction, whether it's direct or indirect, becomes part of the narrative and gets analysed just like everything else. For some people, a strong response suggests there's something deeper going on, while for others it's simply a natural reaction to being the centre of intense public scrutiny. But regardless of how it's interpreted, it keeps the focus on the situation and prevents it from fading out of public discussion. At this stage, the story is no longer moving in a straight line. It's expanding in multiple directions at once, with new claims, new interpretations, and new perspectives being added constantly. And that's what makes it feel so unpredictable, because no one really knows what will come next or which part of the narrative will gain the most attention. What started as a few questions has now turned into a complex web of ideas, and the more people try to untangle it, the more complicated it seems to become. As everything continued building, the focus slowly shifted toward what many people now see as the potential turning point of this entire situation, Cabot Phillips himself, and the possibility that he might actually speak out. Up until now, most of what's been driving the conversation has come from old posts, resurfaced moments, and online interpretations, but the idea of someone with direct proximity stepping forward changes everything. Because when a person who was actually there during certain chapters of the story decides to share their perspective, it can instantly reshape how people understand the entire situation. That's exactly why so many eyes are now locked on Cabot Phillips. His continued presence in public spaces, especially through events tied to Charlie's legacy, has already made him a central figure in the conversation. But it's not just about where he is, it's about what he might know. People believe that if he really was close to Erika Kirk during a period that's now being questioned, then he could have insights that go beyond speculation. And that possibility alone has created a level of anticipation that's keeping this story alive and growing. What makes this even more intense is the rumor that he could potentially reveal behind-the-scenes details. Whether those rumors are true or not, the idea itself is enough to shift the entire energy of the situation. Because once people start expecting a reveal, every move, every appearance, and every silence becomes significant. If he stays quiet, people will question why. If he speaks, people will analyze every word. Either way, the outcome has the potential to push the story into a completely different direction. At the same time, this situation highlights how much influence perception has over reality. Even without any confirmed statements from him, the belief that he could say something has already changed how people are viewing everything else. It has made past details feel more important, current reactions feel more meaningful, and the overall situation feel like it's building toward a major moment, and that's what separates this from regular online drama. It doesn't feel finished, it feels like it's still unfolding. There's also the question of timing, which adds another layer to everything. The fact that his name is coming up again now, during a period when attention is already high, makes people wonder whether this is coincidence or something more connected. And once timing becomes part of the discussion, it strengthens the belief that there might be a larger sequence of events at play, even if that hasn't been clearly proven. Right now, everything feels like it's sitting on the edge of a shift. The narrative has already grown from simple questions into widespread speculation. And now it's waiting for something that could either confirm parts of it or completely change it. And that's why people are paying such close attention, not just because of what has already been said, but because of what might be said next. As everything now stands, this entire situation has reached a point where it's no longer just about individual details. It's about the bigger picture and how people are choosing to interpret it. What started as a few resurfaced posts and timeline questions has grown into a full narrative that continues to evolve with every new discussion. Some people believe there's more beneath the surface that hasn't been fully revealed yet, while others think this is simply a case of the internet connecting dots that may not actually be connected. And that difference in perspective is exactly what's keeping the conversation alive. At the center of it all is uncertainty. There are claims, reactions, and patterns that people are analyzing, but there still isn't a single clear version of events that everyone agrees on. And when a story reaches that point, it doesn't fade, it expands. Because people don't just want information, they want clarity. And until they feel like they have it, they're going to keep watching, questioning, and forming their own conclusions. That's why every small update feels bigger than it actually is, because it has the potential to either support what people already believe or challenge it completely. What makes this situation even more powerful is the role of anticipation. Right now, all people aren't just reacting to what has already happened. They're waiting for what might happen next. The possibility that Cabot Phillips could speak, the ongoing reactions from Erika Kirk, and the continued resurfacing of past details all contribute to a sense that this story isn't finished yet. It feels like something that's still building, and that feeling alone is enough to keep attention locked in. But at the same time, it's important to recognize the difference between speculation and confirmed information. In viral situations like this, those lines can easily blur, and once they do, the narrative can take on a life of its own. That doesn't mean people are wrong for asking questions. It just means that not every answer being suggested has been proven. And understanding that balance is key to seeing the situation clearly instead of just reacting to the loudest version of the story. Now here's the real question for you. Do you think this is just another viral situation where the internet is reading too much into things? Or do you believe there's actually more going on behind the scenes that hasn't come out yet? Because depending on how you see it, the entire story changes. Drop your thoughts below. Share this with someone who's been following this situation and stay tuned. Because if anything new comes out, it could shift everything all over again.